Wait, is that a barcode on her waist? What is she, inventory? Laughter echoed through the store aisle as Trina Cross silently lifted another crate. Her cropped shirt had ridden up, just enough to reveal the faded black ink above her hip. Ray Holcomb, standing near the coffee machine, froze mid-pour. 42 to 9A, his old unit, officially wiped out. No survivors, but she was right there, stocking soda bottles like she hadn't crawled out of a war zone. Who was this woman? Why had she vanished? And why the hell was she hiding in a gas station? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Like and subscribe to stay with us. The sun bore down on the cracked asphalt outside Depot 16 Market, the kind of small roadside convenience store no one remembered until they needed gas, cigarettes, or a last-minute soda. Trina Cross had already been working the early shift for 4 hours, her arms slick with sweat, the sleeves of her black company tee rolled up to her shoulders. She moved with practiced rhythm: scan, bag, count change, restock. Customers came and went, most without a glance, and that suited her just fine. Until they showed up. Donald Greaves kicked the door open with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Behind him followed 2 men in business casual polos, laughing at a joke they were already telling too loudly. Trina didn't flinch. She kept her eyes down as she rang up the elderly woman buying instant noodles. "Morning, sweetheart," Donald said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Miss us?" The old woman shuffled out, casting a sympathetic glance at Trina. "Didn't think so," Donald chuckled to himself. He grabbed a Red Bull from the fridge and tossed it over his shoulder. One of his lackeys, Greg or Grant, Trina never bothered to learn which, caught it with a smirk. The third, the youngest of the trio, took out his phone and started filming casually as they spread out like they owned the place. Trina didn't look up. She scanned the next item, beef jerky. "Tell me, Greaves," the younger man said, pointing his camera toward Trina as she knelt to grab a pack of gum from the bottom shelf. "You think the barcode scanner works better if the product's already labeled?" Donald laughed. "You mean her? Come on, show it again, sweetheart. That barcode you got inked above your ass. Let's see if it scans. Maybe you're on sale today." The laughter echoed. Trina stood slowly, calm, mechanical. She didn't answer. She just turned and moved to stock the shelves behind the register. Her black shirt clung to her back, revealing nothing. "Come on, don't be shy," Donald goaded. "We just want to see if you're the deluxe model or clearance." Greg laughed too hard. Trina felt, but didn't let it in. Ray Holcomb, who had entered quietly a few minutes earlier, stood by the coffee machine. He hadn't said a word, but now something in Donald's taunt made him look up, and when Trina reached for the top shelf, her shirt lifted just slightly. There it was, just a flash, faded black ink, 4 numbers, 2 letters, 42 to 9A. Ray's breath caught in his throat. His grip tightened on the styrofoam cup. "Hey, you okay there, man?" the kid with the phone called out, amused. "You look like you saw a ghost. Or maybe one of your old products on its clearance too?" But Ray wasn't listening. Not to them. Not anymore. Because 42 to 9A wasn't just a random tattoo. It was a unit designation. His unit. And they were all gone, declared Kia. No survivors, no bodies, no... Wait, there had been rumors. A mechanic. A ghost. Donald whistled. "She's got that look again. The I'm pretending I don't hear you look. Ain't that cute?" Trina didn't move. Donald took a step closer. "Tell me something. Does that ink mean anything? Or is it just fashion?" Still silence. Greg grabbed a soda, popped the tab, and slurped loudly. "Maybe it's the price tag from wherever they found her. Burnt out and half off." Ray set down his cup without sipping. His face had gone pale beneath the brim of his veteran ball cap. Trina turned. Her voice was steady. "You gonna buy anything or just run your mouth dry again?" Donald grinned. "Depends. Did you get any dignity on sale today? Maybe self-respect behind the counter?" Ray took a slow step forward. Trina's eyes met his, just for a second, and Ray knew. There was steel behind those eyes, the same kind he'd seen in sand-blasted nights, surrounded by artillery fire and screaming chaos. The look of someone who knew exactly how close death could get, and had told it to wait. Donald waved his phone in her face. "Smile for the camera, barcode. You're about to be famous." Trina stared at the lens. No expression, no fear, only one word: good. Donald paused. Trina leaned forward just slightly. "Because when you press upload, you're not just sharing a video, you're declaring a war you're not ready for." She turned away, moving behind the register again. The scanner beeped as she continued checking out the next customer like nothing had happened. Ray exhaled slowly. It had begun. Ray didn't leave immediately. He lingered by the drinks cooler, pretending to read labels while his eyes subtly trailed the woman behind the counter. Trina Cross moved with a rhythm far too refined for retail. Her body language wasn't just efficient, it was tactical. That fact struck him again and again. It had to be her. 42 to 9A wasn't just a designation, it was a ghost, and this woman was not supposed to exist. Ray clutched his coffee, his fingers tightening around the cup as the door chimed. Donald Greaves and his lackeys sauntered out, laughing like they owned the world. Trina didn't watch them go. She simply turned her back, calm and unreadable. He stepped up to the register. "Excuse me." Trina looked up, her expression reset to polite professionalism. "Yes, sir?" "That tattoo, 42 to 9A. Who gave it to you?" She didn't flinch, but her eyes did narrow almost imperceptibly. "Why do you ask?" Ray took off his cap. The logo was sun-bleached but still visible, a faded red numeral 1, infantry, big red one. "Because I led that unit. There weren't supposed to be any survivors." She blinked once. Her voice dropped. "There weren't. Not officially." A can of soup beeped as she scanned it. She handed it to the waiting customer and looked down the aisle. No one was paying attention. "Meet me out back in an hour." He nodded. The sun was lower by the time Trina appeared in the alley behind the store. Her apron was gone, replaced by a black tank top. She carried a worn rag in one hand and smelled faintly of grease and asphalt. "You came," she said, not surprised. Ray nodded. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was. For 3 days." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she crouched by a metal crate and sat. The cement radiated heat, but she didn't flinch. The final drop zone was West Ghazni, South Ridge. We were escorting a medevac chopper through hostile territory. Hit a patch of rough air right before we caught mortar fire. You remember? Ray nodded slowly. "I signed off on that mission." Trina exhaled. "I was underneath the bird when the first shell hit, blew the rear stabilizer. The pilot was dead before he could scream. The rest tried to stabilize, but..." She paused, searching for the right word. It was chaos. Ray sat down across from her, careful not to interrupt. "I crawled through the wreck. Found the comms panel, tried rerouting. One last message, one last ping, something. Anything got blown sideways when the fuel tank ignited. Everything went black." She looked away. "I woke up 3 days later, under a twisted chunk of plating. The rain had started. That's the only reason I didn't bake to death." Ray closed his eyes. He remembered the after-action report. Total loss. No signal, no pings. All presumed Kia. He remembered his own guilt, signing the closure order. "I limped half a mile west. Found a supply unit. Medevac pulled me out. By then, nobody believed I was even there." "They didn't believe you?" She laughed, dry and sharp. "They thought I was some looter who'd gotten her hands on a uniform. One guy said I was delusional, trauma fantasy. The tags they found were melted beyond recognition." Ray rubbed his temples. "But the tattoo, 42 to 9A, that's not something anyone would fake. I inked it myself. After the army turned me into a footnote, I wanted a reminder, not just of who I was, but of everyone we lost." A silence hung between them, thick, heavy, Finally, Ray spoke. "You should come forward, let them know. And then what? Headlines? Veterans Day parade? Justice?" Trina shook her head. "I'm not interested in vindication. I'm interested in people like Greaves shutting their mouths before they cost someone their dignity." Ray exhaled. "You planning something?" She stood and stretched her arms. The sunlight caught the scar tissue along her bicep, faded but clear. "Let's just say I've been watching, listening, cataloging. What do you mean? He comes here every Tuesday. He talks big, too big. Names, dates, companies. I memorize everything. I have receipts." Ray looked at her like he was seeing a soldier in camo again, not a cashier. "You're still in the fight. I never left, just changed weapons." And with that, she walked back inside, the automatic door hissing shut behind her. Ray stayed in the heat a while longer, and for the first time in years he felt something return, not anger, purpose. Tuesday came again, just like clockwork. The air inside Depot 16 Market was thick with the faint tang of motor oil and dust. Trina stood behind the register, restocking a rack of batteries, her eyes flicking toward the clock. 8:11 a.m. They'd be here soon, and they were, right on schedule. Donald Greaves pushed through the glass door with a swagger of entitlement, followed by his usual shadows, Grant and Lewis. This time, Lewis carried a new gadget, a clip-on mic for his phone. Trina caught the detail in the reflection of the glass refrigerator. She didn't react. Hey, it's our favorite aisle attendant," Donald called out with a mock cheer. "Still can't get a new shirt barcode?" Grant barked a laugh. "Maybe she gets a discount every time someone scans her." Trina finished setting the battery pack down, ND, then turned. Calm, steady. "Anything I can help you gentlemen with today?" "Yeah," Donald said, leaning against the counter. "Why don't you explain how someone like you ends up working here? You mess up too many orders in prison, or were you just too ugly for waitressing?" He grinned. Lewis was already recording. "You should smile more," Donald added, reaching casually for a display of candy bars near the register. "People might actually think you're human." Trina's voice was flat. "Please don't touch the display if you're not purchasing." Donald laughed and held his hands up in mock innocence. Across the store, Ray Holcomb entered through the side door quietly. He nodded toward Trina but kept his distance, heading for the fridge. He'd come prepared, hat low, phone already set to record audio. Trina moved with slow precision. She rang up the candy bar Donald had tossed to the counter, then handed him the receipt without meeting his gaze. "You ever think about getting that thing removed?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward her waist. She didn't answer. "I mean," Donald continued, "unless you really want everyone to know where you were tagged. Wait, let me guess. Black site? Secret lab? Or maybe you just wanted to feel branded. Fits your vibe." Ray's grip tightened around a bottle of iced tea. "Bet she got it for a guy," Grant said. "Some convict boyfriend. You know how those tattoos mean loyalty or something? She's probably the one who branded him," Lewis added, laughing. "Can't imagine anyone else volunteering." Trina's voice, when it came, was razor sharp but quiet. "You boys always confuse cruelty for charm." Donald's eyes glinted. "Careful now. That tone could cost you a job." Trina tilted her head. "That depends. Would you fire me yourself, or ask your assistant to type the letter while you rehearse a fake HR policy?" Grant laughed nervously, not sure whether to be amused or alarmed. Ray stepped forward, placing his drink on the counter with a thunk. Trina scanned it wordlessly. Donald narrowed his eyes. "You two know each other?" Ray answered first. "No, but I know the kind of people who don't back down when they've already survived worse than you." Lewis chuckled. "What's this, gas station Gandhi?" Donald leaned closer. "You got a problem, old man?" Ray didn't blink. "Only when people mistake power for volume." Trina's hand brushed the scanner once more. Then she leaned slightly forward. "Smile for the camera again," she said to Lewis. "You might want to capture this part really clearly." Donald rolled his eyes. "What, you going to monologue now?" Trina turned slightly, lifting her shirt just enough for the barcode tattoo to show. Ray held his breath. "I got this ink to remember the people who didn't make it back," she said. "People who died doing real work, not hiding behind office chairs or outsourcing ethics to interns." She dropped her shirt, her voice hardened. "And every week, you come in here and talk like you own the world. But what you don't know is that I remember everything you say. Names, accounts, contracts, numbers." Donald blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I've been taking notes," Trina continued. "You don't even realize how much you've admitted on tape." Ray watched as the men shifted. Lewis lowered his phone slightly. "You think it's just jokes," Trina said, "but you've name-dropped clients, bragged about firing employees for not fitting the image, and even described how to falsify termination records. I know what Mitchell and Greaves really does behind the scenes." Donald looked at Lewis. "Delete the video." "No," Trina said sharply. "Keep recording. The truth should come out. Do you want to humiliate me? Fine, but do it knowing that every word might already be in someone's inbox." Grant paled. Ray leaned slightly closer. "She's not bluffing." Donald clenched his jaw. "You little—" Trina didn't let him finish. "Walk out of this store, Donald, and pray what I know never sees daylight." He stared at her, breathing hard. Then, slowly, he turned. They left without another word. Only the chime of the door broke the silence. Ray exhaled. "You sure you're not military intelligence?" Trina allowed herself the smallest smile. "Let's just say I fix broken things. Some of them are human." He nodded slowly. "I hope you know what you're starting." "I'm not starting anything," she said. "I'm finishing it." The heat outside Depot 16 Market didn't relent, but something in the air had shifted since last Tuesday. Inside, the routine continued. Boxes to shelf, receipts to reconcile, and customers to ring up. Trina moved efficiently behind the register, but her mind ticked with soldier-like precision. She knew today wasn't going to be just another day. Not after last week's confrontation. Ray had come in earlier that morning. He didn't speak much, just gave her a slight nod, the kind exchange between people who'd both seen too much and knew it. He lingered in the back, near the magazine rack. Trina's phone buzzed once in her back pocket. She pulled it out only to glance at the lock screen. A simple notification, scheduled upload queued, right on time. At 8:32 a.m. the glass door rattled open. Donald Greaves entered first, but there was a tension to his stride. Stiff, overcompensating. He wore sunglasses indoors, though the overcast sky made them unnecessary. Behind him trailed Grant, looking less cocky than usual, and Lewis, who kept fiddling nervously with the mic on his shirt. They grabbed the usual energy drinks, protein bars, and a pack of jerky, but their voices were lower now, laughter strained. Trina greeted them politely, her tone neutral, but she noticed the way Donald avoided eye contact. "You good, barcode?" he asked after a long silence, trying too hard to sound casual. "Always," she replied. "Want a receipt?" Donald hesitated, then shook his head. Grant stepped up to the counter next, pretending to yawn. "Long week," he mumbled. Trina raised an eyebrow. "Rough few days?" Grant shrugged. "A couple of our clients got jumpy. Weird timing." "Strange," Trina said, bagging the items, almost like something made them nervous. Donald stiffened again. "You trying to say something?" She smiled mildly. "I don't need to. You're already hearing it." That was when the first notification pinged on Donald's phone. Then another, and another. Ray, still in the back of the store, raised an eyebrow as he watched Donald's face pale. Donald unlocked his phone. His lips moved silently as he scrolled. Then, "What the hell is this?" He turned the screen toward Trina. "You posted this?" She glanced at the video playing, one of their Tuesday mornings, unedited, with audio synced to visible captions. Donald's voice was unmistakable. "You fire the ones that don't fit, document it later. Cultural misalignment, productivity excuse, whatever checks the box." The clip cuts to another moment, Lewis laughing. "Client doesn't like her? Just call it a restructuring." Trina didn't answer. Behind her, Ray stepped forward. Donald's hands shook. "You recorded us?" "No," Trina replied. "You recorded yourselves. I just made sure it didn't disappear." Lewis's face turned red. "You can't just leak stuff like that." "I didn't leak," she said. "I shared a personal experience, and apparently it resonated." The bell over the door chimed. 2 new customers entered, both with military posture and quiet authority. They didn't buy anything, just lingered by the fridge, watching. Grant whispered to Donald, "I think that's Carter from Steele and Ward." He saw the video. Trina folded her arms. "You've been calling me invisible for months. Turns out invisible people hear everything. And when they speak, the world listens." Ray looked at Donald. "You should leave." But Donald wasn't ready to back down. "You don't understand. We have partners and investors. This could ruin your reputation?" Trina cut in. "Should have thought of that before you built it on humiliation." He stepped closer. "Do you know what you've done?" Trina didn't flinch. "I do. I've taken back the ground you thought belonged to you, one video at a time." Donald's phone rang. He stared at the caller ID, Simmons and Gray Legal. He didn't answer, just slowly walked out of the store. Ray waited until the door shut. "That's the only one you posted?" "3 more queued," she said. "Timed releases. This is only the first ripple." Ray chuckled softly. "You fight like a field operator." "I was a mechanic," Trina said, "but I listened to everyone, and I remembered everything." She looked up at him. "And now they don't get to forget." Outside, Donald sat in his car with his head in his hands. The notifications hadn't stopped. His phone lit up like a Christmas tree of consequences. Inside the store, one of the new customers, Carter, approached Trina quietly. "You're the one from 42 to 9A?" She nodded slowly. Carter didn't speak right away. Then he offered a small, respectful salute. "I knew Lieutenant Howe." He spoke of a mechanic who kept a squadron flying longer than physics allowed, said she could rebuild a rotor with duct tape and instinct. Trina's voice softened. "I just fixed what I could." Carter smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's enough to save a dozen lives." He left without another word. Ray looked at her. "Still think hiding was easier?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's definitely over now." The bell above the door rang again. This time it wasn't another customer. It was Tony, the store's manager. He looked shaken. "You're trending nationally," he said. "People are calling. Reporters, veterans, even civil rights groups." Trina blinked. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are," Tony replied, "and for not staying silent." She took a breath, deep, grounding. Outside, the clouds shifted, just enough for a sliver of sun to cut through. The war wasn't over, but something had changed. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. And finally, people were listening. The call started before noon. Tony was the first to notice. His office phone rang non-stop, blinking red with missed calls. Even as he hung up on one, "I've never had CNN call this store before," he muttered, half amused, half in disbelief. Trina sat behind the small break-room table, sipping lukewarm coffee. She didn't look at her phone anymore. It had gone from vibrating to overheating. Texts from strangers, journalists, veterans, civil rights attorneys. Even a major podcast had reached out. But she hadn't posted anything since the first video. The second one had dropped automatically that morning, and the internet had taken it from there. It showed Donald leaning against the counter saying, "Honestly, we just make the paperwork match the desired outcome. Do they want fewer black employees? We find performance issues. Done." That one hit harder. It didn't just show arrogance, it exposed strategy, cold, systemic, and real. Ray stopped by mid-afternoon holding 2 ice-cold bottles of water. He handed one to her without a word. She took it and gave a nod of thanks. "You all right?" he asked. Trina hesitated. "I feel like I stepped on a tripwire. I planted myself." Ray cracked a grin. "That's called tactics." She looked at him. "It doesn't feel like winning. Feels like waiting for the next hit." He sat beside her. That's because you're not used to being supported. Now you've got momentum. You've got allies. She shook her head. I didn't want to be a cause. I just wanted them to shut up. Sometimes shutting one person up opens a lot of other mouths. At 3:12 p.m., Tony walked in again, waving his phone. You're not going to believe this, he said. The Department of Labor just left a voicemail. They want to speak with you. On record. Trina blinked. Me? They said you might have key information related to workplace discrimination in multiple states. Ray leaned back. Sounds like someone's listening at the highest level now. By Thursday, a new article had dropped. Headline: Veteran Mechanic Outs Discriminatory Practices with Video Evidence. The Quiet Power of Trina Cross. It was well researched, honest. It mentioned the tattoo, the scars, and the survival story. But most importantly, it cited the actual violations she'd captured. It was picked up by 3 other outlets within hours. Trina stayed off social media. Ray helped filter the noise, screening her calls, blocking trolls and forwarding only the ones that mattered. And then came the email from Maya Barnes, Senior Investigator, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission subject, formal inquiry and witness coordination. Mitchell and Greaves. Trina didn't respond right away. She showed it to Ray. He read it silently, then said, "This is real. You started something real. I didn't mean to go federal," she whispered. He nodded. "That's exactly why you were the right person to do it." Friday morning, the 3rd video was posted. This one was shorter, but more damning. It showed Lewis speaking offhandedly about the benefits of subtle intimidation and how minorities with trauma histories fold fast when pressured. There was no laughter this time, no swagger. The comment sections were filled with fury. A woman named Nadia Gonzalez, a former employee at a Greaves-affiliated firm, commented, "This happened to me. They said I didn't fit the cultural energy. Now I know what that really meant." Another commenter replied, "My termination letter had the exact phrasing from Donald's video, word for word." Trina scrolled in silence. This wasn't just about her anymore. Ray placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed emails, handwritten notes and receipts. "What's this?" she asked. "I talked to a few of the guys from your old unit. We've been piecing things together. It's time you had the full record." Trina's fingers traced the edge of a field report. It bore her name, but it had been marked classified, not validated. "They filed you under anomaly," Ray said. "Didn't know what to do with a survivor no one expected." She didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "Let's not let them decide. The ending." Monday morning brought a storm, not of weather, but of consequence. Mitchell and Greaves issued a formal statement of denial. They blamed deepfakes, misrepresentation, and context manipulation. It backfired immediately. Digital experts debunked the claim within hours. By afternoon, the company's website went offline. 3 clients dropped their contracts. 1 investor announced a withdrawal. Tony received a letter addressed to Trina. No return address. Just a name in sharp handwriting, Lieutenant Commander Marie Harding, U.S. Army. Retired. Inside was a photo. A younger Trina, covered in grease, is sitting on the hood of a half-burned transport vehicle, grinning. Next to her was Lieutenant Howe. Written on the back, "She saved us. Don't let them rewrite it." Trina stared at it for a long time. Then she reached for her phone and called Maya Barnes from the EEOC. "I'm ready to testify," she said. That night, Ray and Trina sat on the curb behind Depot 16. Neither spoke for a long while. Then Ray said, "You've already won, you know." She shook her head. "Not yet." "Then what are you waiting for?" For the silence to stop echoing. He looked at her, puzzled. Trina gestured to her temple. "It's not just out there, it's in here. Years of being told I didn't exist. That was a glitch, a fluke. Sometimes the hardest war is proving to yourself that you belong." Ray nodded slowly. "Then maybe now it's time to rewrite the battlefield." She smiled faintly. Maybe. The final video will drop in the morning. It wasn't her revenge. It was their reckoning. And this time, the whole country would see it happen. The fourth video was posted just after dawn. No warning, no caption, just an upload from the same account that had already shaken an industry. This time, the clip began differently. It didn't start with mocking or laughter. It began with silence. Then Donald's voice cut in, low and confident. You can get away with anything if you bury it under enough policy jargon. That's the real power. No one's brave enough to challenge paperwork. It ran for only 40 seconds, but it was all anyone needed. By 7:30 a.m., it was on the front page of Reddit. By 8:15, it hit Twitter's trending tab. And by 9, every major news outlet had linked to it. Trina didn't watch it. She didn't need to. She remembered every word. But the world was watching now. The fallout was immediate. Mitchell and Greaves' headquarters in Denver had to shut down midday due to protests. A group of veterans had gathered with signs bearing phrases like, "Respect has no expiration date. Mechanics kept you flying. She fixed birds. Now she's fixing justice." By noon, the company's partners began issuing separate statements. By 1 p.m., the company's board announced an emergency vote to remove Donald Greaves from leadership. Trina got the news while she was wiping down the soda machine. Tony came rushing out, phone in hand. "They're ousting him. The board is kicking him out, effective immediately." She blinked. "That fast?" Tony nodded. "You detonated a whole structure, quietly, brilliantly." Trina exhaled. "I didn't expect it to collapse this hard." Tony shrugged. "Paper palaces never survive fire." That evening, Trina returned to her apartment. She hadn't been there much lately, spending hours with Ray, legal consultations, reporters, but tonight felt different. She needed space. She pulled a storage box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside, parts of a life she'd hidden, a folded uniform shirt, an old set of dog tags, a photo of her crew. She sat with them for hours, remembering. Not all of them had names that made headlines. Most didn't even have families who knew how they died. But she remembered every call sign, every joke, every bruise and burn and patch job. She laid the shirt across her lap, and she cried, not because she was sad, because for the first time in years she felt seen. The next morning, a man in a grey suit showed up at Depot 16 Market. He wore a badge, Department of Labor, Federal Investigation Division. He wasn't loud, didn't flash it like a threat, just introduced himself to Tony and then asked to speak with Trina. In the break room, he said one thing that stuck. "You didn't just provide evidence, you exposed a pattern. We think this reaches beyond one company." Trina listened. Then she asked, "What happens next?" He replied, "That depends on whether you're willing to speak on camera." Trina was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Only if I control the words." He smiled. "That's already happening." By that weekend, major companies released statements about auditing their internal practices. Some mentioned new diversity partnerships. Others offered half-hearted apologies, but one email changed everything. It came from a former HR manager at Mitchell and Greaves. She wrote, "They told me to flag problematic hires without calling it race. I still have internal memos. If Trina's willing, I'll back her up in court." Her name was Rita Haynes, and she was the crack in the dam. Within days, 4 more insiders came forward. Ray said it best. "You didn't just start a fire, you showed people how to light their own." The following Monday, Trina stood outside a federal building in Dallas. The press was gathered nearby, but not close enough to overwhelm. Ray stood beside her, so did Maya Barnes from the EEOC, and Rita. A hearing had been scheduled. Closed door, high level, pre-trial investigative. Trina wore black slacks and a plain grey button-up. No makeup, hair pulled back. Her tattoo is hidden, but her presence? Radiant. Inside the room, she answered every question calmly. She provided context, timelines, clarified when certain clips were recorded. She never exaggerated, never speculated. When asked why she waited so long to speak up, her reply was simple: because no one listens to background noise, and I was taught that women like me, mechanics burned black, only make noise when they're breaking. The room went silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. 3 hours later, outside the courthouse, a young woman approached her. Mid-20s, nervous, civilian clothes. She held something in her hand, a folded note. Trina took it and opened it. Inside, "You fixed my father's bird. Iraq, 2008. He said your hand saved 3 more lives that day. He never forgot." There was no signature, just initials. KM. Trina looked up. The woman was already walking away. That night, a local news station aired a segment on the case. They'd requested a clip from Trina. She refused interviews, but agreed to record a brief statement. On camera, in black and white, she looked straight ahead and said, "I didn't burn for pity. I burned for a cause. And the only thing more dangerous than fire is silence." Then it faded to black. The next morning, the clip had over 5 million views. The following week, Trina received a formal invitation: National Veterans Forum, keynote panel, women who led quiet wars below it. In handwriting, "We saw the barcode. We recognized the warrior." Ray walked in just as she set the letter down. "You going?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she looked up and said, "I think it's time." The wind had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no storm, no clouds gathering, but something about the air felt different the following week as Trina Cross stepped out of her apartment building wearing jeans, a plain shirt, and a faded army ball cap. She looked like anyone, and for once, that felt like power. Word had spread far beyond what anyone imagined. The final video, her words, not just theirs, was now included in 3 university ethics classes, replayed in diversity training programs, and even quoted at a congressional subcommittee on employment reform. She hadn't spoken to the press since the forum. She hadn't needed to. The country was already speaking for her. Ray drove her to a small coffee shop in downtown Houston that morning, not because she needed caffeine, but because she needed quiet. "It's strange," Trina said, sipping her drink. "I thought it'd feel louder now." Ray raised an eyebrow. "Louder?" "In my head," she said, "all those years the silence was pressure, like something I had to hold in my chest. Now that it's out, it's just still." Ray nodded. "You emptied it. That's why." She looked out the window. What do you do when you've carried a fight for so long and suddenly you're not carrying it alone? You choose what to build. That afternoon, Trina returned to Depot 16 briefly, not to work but to meet someone. A van pulled up just as she arrived. The side read, "Veterans Transition Project." A tall woman in a navy vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. She was ex-Air Force by posture and tone. "You must be cross," she said. "We've had 5 young vets asked to be placed here, said they wanted to work where the mechanic stood." Trina almost laughed. "We don't even have benefits. Doesn't matter. They want meaning, and apparently this place has it." She led the woman inside. Tony gave the tour like a proud brother. At the end, the woman said, "I'll submit the application. Could be our first partnered site with a private sector veteran mentor." Trina blinked. "Me? Unless there's another Cross who single-handedly dismantled a corporate discrimination ring while bagging groceries." Trina said nothing, but she smiled. A week later, she stood outside the diner down the road. Not Ray's, not Tony's, a different one. A group of high school students waited inside, fidgeting nervously. Their teacher had emailed her 3 times. She hadn't committed until now. She walked in without fanfare. They recognized her instantly. A few whispered. One girl teared up. Trina sat. "Ask me anything," she said. They did. Some asked about her tattoo, others about the burns. One asked if she hated Greaves now. "No," Trina answered. "I just hope he hears silence the way I used to. That's enough." When she left, the teacher handed her a note. Inside, "Thank you for proving survival is a form of leadership." That night she visited the old hangar site near the edge of town. It wasn't operational anymore, just an empty shell. She stood at the gate, staring across the cracked concrete. In her hand, a small metal plate, scratched, warped, edges melted. It had once been part of an engine panel she salvaged from that last mission. She knelt and buried it in the dirt. "You flew us once," she whispered. "Now I can walk again." And then she walked away. By the end of the month, Trina's journal had grown thick with names. Not of those who harmed her, but of those she wanted to lift. Vets starting over, students are asking questions, teachers requesting guidance. She began writing back. Each letter ended the same way: "You are not background noise, you are signal. Stand tall," because now she wasn't surviving in silence. She was building something louder than applause. Legacy. Depot 16 Market smelled like fresh cleaner and cardboard. The new recruits had arrived. Trina stood near the back counter, watching as Tony showed two young veterans where the dry storage bins were. One of them, Micah, had a prosthetic arm and moved like he'd been unloading crates his whole life. The other, Layla, wore her old fatigues with the sleeves ripped off and already had a clipboard tucked under one arm. "You're cross?" Layla asked when they crossed paths. "I am. I saw the footage. All of it. Didn't believe it at first. Not that it happened, but that someone actually did something." Trina gave a half smile. "Sometimes silence just gets tired," Micah chimed in from behind a stack of bottled water. "The video with Greaves, that hit hard. My last manager was cut from the same cloth. I didn't even know what to call it until I heard him say it out loud." Trina nodded. "Now you do." They spent the morning unloading a delivery truck. There was no speech, no formal mentorship, but the rhythm felt right, efficient, respectful. Tony grinned from the register like a man watching his team win without even suiting up. Later, while wiping down the coolers, Layla asked, "So what now? You gonna run for office or something?" Trina raised an eyebrow. "Why does everyone think the only place to lead is from a podium?" Layla shrugged. "Because they don't expect it from behind a register." Trina leaned on the mop handle. "Then maybe we're exactly where we need to be." That evening, Trina received a package at her apartment. No return address. Inside was a sealed envelope and a brass plate. On the plate was engraved Sergeant Trina Cross, Field Mechanic, Unit 429A. Never forgotten the note inside. Read, "A group of us tracked down the flight manifest from Ghazni. We thought the records were gone. They weren't. We've submitted the correction forms. Your name's going on the memorial wall next month. No longer presumed Kia. Finally, properly recorded. Thought you should have this first. Signed, Lieutenant Maria Kim, retired." Trina held the plate in both hands for a long time. It was heavier than she expected. She didn't cry, but she sat still until the sun dipped behind the building and her apartment turned gold. The ceremony came a week later. She didn't want to go. She hadn't planned to attend, but Ray insisted. "It's not about being seen," he said. "It's about standing where they said you weren't." The memorial wall stood inside a long corridor at the Veterans Historical Center. It shimmered with hundreds of names etched deep into panels of steel and obsidian. Trina arrived late, kept her distance, let the others gather, take photos and salute. But when she stepped up to the new panel, she found it, her name. No asterisk, no question mark. Just Cross, Trina L., Sergeant, U.S. Army, 42 to 9. A Ray stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You stood for them," he whispered. Now they stand with you. And for once she let herself believe it. That night, back at her apartment, she updated the first page of her journal. It now read, "For the ones who never came home, and the ones who did, but were never seen, we are signal, and they hear us now." The next morning, Trina returned to Depot 16 before the sun had fully climbed the sky. The streets were quiet, the store lights still flickering on. She unlocked the back door and stepped inside. The brass plate from the memorial sat in her backpack. She hadn't decided what to do with it yet. By 8, Layla and Micah had arrived. Trina watched them laugh as they unpacked a shipment of energy drinks, debating whether lemon lime or watermelon was the true enemy of taste buds. There was something healing about watching others move forward, knowing her scars weren't the loudest in the room anymore. Tony brought over the morning sales numbers. "We're up 15% this week." "Sympathy?" Trina asked. "Respect," Tony corrected, "and maybe a little curiosity, but mostly respect." She took the clipboard. "Let's earn it." At lunchtime, a group of local college students came in carrying notebooks and recording devices. "We're doing a podcast for our history project," the lead student said, "on post-war silence and economic reintegration. Someone told us to come here." "Who?" Trina asked. "Professor Holcomb." Trina blinked. "Ray." She agreed to an interview. They sat outside on milk crates near the loading dock. The questions were thoughtful. She answered carefully, not dodging, not embellishing. "Do you think this is the final chapter of your story?" one student asked. Trina looked toward the road. A dust devil twisted past the parking lot. "No," she said. "It's the first chapter I chose to write." That evening, Ray invited her to a community forum. Local officials were hosting a panel on veteran employment and discrimination policy. Trina didn't want to speak, but she attended. Midway through, someone in the audience asked why the panel lacked any working-class veteran voices. Ray stood. "Actually, one sitting right behind me." All eyes turned to Trina. A moment passed. She stood slowly. "I'm not a policymaker," she began, "but I do know what it feels like to fix a rotor blade with blood on your shirt. I know what it feels like to be laughed at while scanning barcodes with burned hands, and I know what it means when someone finally says, 'We see you.' Silence, then applause, not the loud kind, the kind that builds." A week later, the owner of the entire Depot chain called, offered to franchise her as a regional trainer. Said the board had voted after the Trina Cross effect led to a 28% uptick across rural stores. Trina declined. "You sure?" the voice asked. "It's a chance to lead on a bigger scale." "I already am," she said and hung up. Later that night, Micah brought out a small hand-carved plaque. "We made something," he said. It read, "Depot 16, built on quiet strength." They hung it above the back door. Layla added a note underneath, "Founded by the woman who turned silence into a signal." As the days passed, Trina kept writing in her journal, not to look back, but to map what came next. She wrote about the girl from the diner who cried. She wrote about the students with microphones. She wrote about grease under fingernails and burned metal, and how dignity doesn't have a salary. Her final entry that month, "Legacy isn't carved into walls, it's felt in hands that no longer shake." And as she stepped out into another morning, Depot 16 behind her and a sky full of promise ahead, she didn't need a crowd to know she mattered. She just walked forward, and that was enough. It started with a repost. Someone on a military forum found the original video of Trina confronting Donald Greaves. They paired it with the footage from the memorial ceremony and added a caption, 42 to 9A wasn't erased, it was reborn. The post exploded. Within hours, it hit veteran pages, women's military groups, and even law school forums. By the end of the day, national journalists were asking, "Who is Trina Cross?" Ray called her that night. "It's going to snowball. Be ready." She wasn't. The next morning, news vans were parked near Depot 16. Trina stayed inside, letting Tony field questions. She didn't want sound bites, she wanted space. But the pressure didn't stop. Donald Greaves released a statement that avoided an apology and painted himself as misunderstood. A damage control campaign followed. He posted pictures shaking hands with veterans, claiming his comments were satirical. It only made things worse. Trina received anonymous emails. Some thanked her, others weren't so kind. One said, "You embarrassed a good man. Hope your 15 minutes were worth it." Another, "People like you are why men like him have to defend themselves." Ray offered to have someone review the threats. She declined. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm not afraid," she replied. "I'm just exhausted." But exhaustion didn't stop the truth. A former contractor came forward, then another, then 5. All had worked for Donald's firm. All had stories of sexism, underpayment, racist jokes, and retaliation. One woman had recorded a meeting. Her voice cracked in the audio. "He said I should be grateful I had a job. Said girls with scars shouldn't expect promotions." That clip aired on national news. By then, Trina couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone recognizing her. She hated the attention, but she understood the impact. "You broke the pattern," Micah told her. "Now people see it." Late one night, she got a message from a man named Caleb, a former squad leader from 42 to 9A, thought to be dead. But he wasn't. He'd survived like her. The message was short. "I saw you. I remembered the rota. You bought us time. I lived because of that." Trina stared at the screen for a long time. She never replied. But she saved it. Donald's company began losing clients. Corporate partners distanced themselves. Trina didn't have to do anything. The receipts were everywhere. Ray uploaded the full dossier, testimonies, photos, emails, onto a public server. He titled The Archive, Cost of Silence, A Study in Patterns. It became case material at 2 universities. Trina kept working. One afternoon, a woman came in, mid-40s, wore a suit, ordered a soda. "You're cross, right?" "Yes." The woman handed her a card. "Avery Kim, Legal Counsel, Department of Defense Office. We're launching an initiative. Civilian Transition Recognition Frameworks. We want you on the advisory board." "I'm not a lawyer. We don't need lawyers. We need truth." Trina didn't say yes. Not then. But she kept the card. Back at home, her apartment had become a drop site. Letters arrived from all over, from Gold Star mothers, from retired medics, from a girl who wrote, "My brother died in 42 to 9A. I never knew what happened. You made it real." Another simply said, "Thank you for not disappearing." Trina built a shelf. She didn't hang her medals on it. She placed the letters. One day, Tony walked in with a folded newspaper. "Front page Depot clerk exposes empire of abuse," he grinned. "Never thought I'd see clerk and empire in the same headline." She laughed. It was real laughter. Ray dropped by that weekend with 3 copies of his manuscript. The cover showed a silhouette of a woman facing the wind, bar R-code visible on her waist. Title, "The Barcode at Her Waist." "The story of Trina crossed too dramatic?" he asked. She flipped through it. "You got the part about the wrench wrong. I'll fix it in the 2nd edition." As summer neared, Trina received an email from a teacher in Kansas. She'd assigned the cross story to her civics class. One student had cried reading it. "Do you ever speak at schools?" the teacher asked. Trina stared at the screen. Then, after a moment, she replied, "Yes, I think I do." Her first talk happened in a gymnasium with bad acoustics, folding chairs, fidgeting kids. A flag hung crookedly behind her. She spoke about the repair, about resilience, about how dignity isn't granted, it's remembered. When it ended, a boy raised his hand. "My mom works 2 jobs. She says she's invisible." Trina walked over and knelt down. "She's not, and neither are you." That night she wrote a single line in her journal: "Visibility is the first step toward justice." And in a world that kept trying to look away, Trina Cross stood like a flare in the fog, not screaming, just shining, and people saw. They finally saw. The phone rang at 6:04 a.m. Trina didn't answer right away. She was halfway through writing a letter to a girl who'd sent a crayon drawing of a helicopter with a smiley face. The envelope had said, "To the lady who fixed things." The second ring broke her concentration. She picked up. "Miss Cross?" a man's voice asked. "This is Quentin Reese from the Veterans Equity Commission. We've reviewed your case, actually your entire story. We're organizing a symposium in D.C. We'd like you to speak." "I'm not a public speaker. We'll take honesty over polish any day." She sighed. "Send me the details." Depot 16 felt different that morning, not because of foot traffic, which was steady, but because of the silence between customers. People whispered her name now, smiled nervously, left notes on the counter. A little girl handed her a toy wrench, said, "You fix the world." Trina didn't know what to do with that. She just smiled. Tony noticed. "You're officially legendary," he joked. "You gonna start autographing energy drinks?" "No," she replied. "I'll autograph resumes if they want." Later that week, a documentary crew arrived. Not big budget, independent. But they asked good questions, the kind that came from care, not spectacle. "Why do you think people reacted to your story the way they did?" Trina paused. "Because I didn't ask to be noticed, but they noticed anyway." One night, Ray brought over a map. "Look at this," he said, spreading it over her kitchen table. It showed pins across the country, locations where posts tagged #Trinacross had spiked. These aren't just followers, they're people starting something. Workshops, school projects, book clubs. One woman turned a garage into a mechanic training space for female vets, named it Bay 42. Trina ran her hand across the map. "I thought I was buried," she whispered. "You were planted," Ray said. Micah pulled her aside one afternoon. "Layla and I are thinking of re-enlisting." Trina stared at him. "Why?" "Because this time we know what we're standing for and who we're standing with." She didn't try to stop them, but she hugged them longer than she meant to. At night, she reread letters. One stood out. "My husband served with 42 to 9A. He never talked about it. When he died, I thought I'd never understand what he carried. Now I do. Thank you for giving me back a piece of him." Trina placed that letter on top of the shelf and cried. The symposium in D.C. arrived. Trina wore a simple black dress. She carried nothing but a folder with handwritten notes. No slides, no PR team, no security detail. The room held over 300 people. Lawmakers, veterans, students, advocates, people in suits and uniforms and jeans. She stepped to the podium, paused, then began, "I fixed helicopters, that's what I did. Not because it was glamorous, but because broken things deserve one more try." She talked about mud and fire and rotors that wouldn't spin. She talked about silence. She talked about Depot 16. And then she said, "I never raised a weapon, but I held the line with a wrench and a promise. To those who didn't come back, and to those who did but felt invisible. You're not, I see you. And so does the world." Silence. Then the kind of standing ovation that doesn't come from choreography, why, but from catharsis. Afterward, a general approached her. "You remind me of someone I served with. He never wore medals, but he carried all of us." She nodded. "Sounds like someone worth remembering." "He is. And now, so are you." On the flight back, Trina looked out the window at the patchwork of fields below. She thought about Caleb, about Donald, about grease and bone and laughter and code numbers etched in his skin. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, "Let them build whatever they want. I'll keep fixing what matters." The next day, the morning light broke gently over the dusty roads of Trina's town. Her boots crunched softly as she approached Depot 16. In her hand, she carried a thin manila envelope. Inside was a copy of her speech, the notes she hadn't needed. Along with it, she had tucked the tiny wrench the girl had given her. She unlocked the store, walked past the racks of chips and batteries, and pinned both items on the bulletin board next to the staff schedule. A hand-lettered sign now hung there too. If something's broken, we fix it. If someone's hurting, we listen. Depot 16. Ray stopped by around 9. "You're officially famous," he said, handing her a folded newspaper. The front page headline read, "The Mechanic Who Mended a Nation's Memory." Trina didn't smile, not exactly, but she took the paper and nodded. Customers trickled in, some old, some news. One man left behind a dog tag in a small velvet box. A girl drew another helicopter, this time with 3 smiley faces. Micah and Layla had shipped out. They left a letter, "We carry your grit with us." That's better than armor. Trina kept it in her pocket. The following week, the school district invited her to speak at an assembly. She declined, then changed her mind. When she walked into the gymnasium, the students were loud. Until she stepped to the microphone, she said only this: "Don't ever laugh at someone who carries their past. The strongest people are often the quietest, and the loudest pain is the one we pretend doesn't exist." Silence, then standing claps. Some teachers cried. A few days later, a delivery truck arrived with no return address. Inside, a plaque of brushed steel, laser-etched with the unit number 42 to 9A, and beneath it, "The Last Mechanic, Never Forgotten." Tony mounted it near the register. A reporter from the local paper asked for a quote. Trina simply said, "That's not for me, that's for them." Trina's journal entries became shorter, not because she had less to say, but because more of her words lived in others now. One evening she wrote, "Legacy is a wrench passed hand to hand," Ray called. He'd been approached about co-writing a book about her story. Trina hesitated, then agreed, but only if the book includes the names of every lost member of 42 to 9A. She wrote the list by hand. Then came the invitation she never expected. The National Memorial Commission offered to add Trina's name to the honor roll of unaccounted heroes. "Are you sure?" she asked. The woman on the phone replied, "The country is..." She flew to DC again. This time not for a speech, but for a silent moment beneath a wall of names. Her name glinted among them, not because she asked, but because the truth refused to stay buried. She stood in front of it alone, then stepped aside to let others see. She didn't cry, but her hands, long used to lifting engines and burdens, trembled just once, then steadied. Back at Depot 16, they held a small ceremony. No cameras, just regulars, coffee, a folded flag, and silence. Tony read aloud a letter from a retired major. "Sometimes the fix isn't on the field. Sometimes it's in a store with shelves and quiet strength. Thank you for holding the line long after the shooting stopped." That night, Trina watched the sunset behind the fuel pumps. Depot 16 glowed from within. Customers came not just for gas, but for something else now, something unspoken but solid. She flipped her notebook to a fresh page, wrote just one sentence, "My hands don't shake anymore," and closed it gently. Tomorrow will bring more stories, but tonight the silence was enough. It was just before dawn when Ray knocked on Trina's door. She opened it wearing her work boots and an old sweatshirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her eyes were calm but alert. "You should see this," Ray said, holding up his phone. "Someone sent me a video last night. Donald Greaves went live on his knees outside your store." Trina blinked. "Now?" "Last night. Said he was sorry. Said the world had made him forget what dignity looked like." Trina didn't say a word, just poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Ray. By noon, the clip had gone viral. Donald's breakdown was raw, unfiltered, a man unraveling not just from guilt, but from the realization he'd underestimated someone the world had come to respect. Tony raised an eyebrow when he watched it. "You think it's real?" "I think it's public," Trina replied. Later that day, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside, a typed letter. No signature, just company letterhead from Greaves Realty. We formally withdrew our legal claim filed earlier this year. All promotional material misusing your likeness has been deleted. Enclosed is a written apology for your records. Trina folded the letter once and then placed it in her filing drawer, not out of spite, but for record keeping. 2 weeks later, Trina stood in the middle of Depot 16's storage room. She was elbow deep in broken shelving parts, reorganizing a back corner that hadn't been touched since Caleb's time. Tony peeked in. "What are you doing?" "Building a space," she said, voice muffled by dust, "for the kids who come in asking how to fix things." It started small, just a bench, a lamp, and a shelf of tools. Then came the sign, "Fix It Fridays." By week 3, 5 teenagers showed up after school. By week 6, it was standing room only. They fixed old toasters, roller skates, and even a church's broken microphone. But more than that, they listened to each other, to her, to silence filled with stories. At one fix-it session, a boy named Marco asked, "Did it hurt, the tattoo?" Trina paused, then smiled. "Not as much as what came before it." He nodded slowly as if he understood more than he let on. Across town, the mayor invited Trina to join the local council advisory board. "I don't do politics," she said. "We need more people who don't," the mayor replied. She agreed, on one condition: all council meetings would include a 5-minute moment of silence for public servants past and present. Not for prayer, just for remembering. Ray's book neared completion. The publisher requested a photo for the cover. Trina refused staged shoots. Instead, she handed them a picture Tony had taken months ago, her hands grease-stained, fixing a coffee machine behind the counter. "That's the story," she said. "Not my face, my work." Late one night, a teenage girl stood outside the store for nearly an hour. Trina watched her from inside. Finally, the girl entered. She wore a hoodie too big for her frame, sleeves tugged over her knuckles. "I saw your video," she said softly. "The one about the scar. I have one too. But it's inside." Trina just nodded. "Can I learn to fix things?" "Yes," Trina replied. "And you'll find you're fixing yourself too." One morning, Trina arrived to find the wall beside the fix-it corner covered in sticky notes. Each note had a message. "I fixed my bike and my anger. I stopped hurting myself. I told my mom I want to live." Tony found her staring at the wall. "Did you put this up?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, they did. The National Veterans magazine ran a feature on her called The Silent Rebuilder. Accompanying it was an op-ed by Ray titled, "She Never Raised Her Voice. She Raised a Generation." On the anniversary of 42 to 9A's last mission, Trina lit a lantern behind Depot 16. No ceremony, no speeches, just a name whispered for each soul. She whispered them all, then sat quietly until the sun rose. The Fix-It program expanded. A nearby town copied it. A retired Air Force mechanic asked to volunteer. They called it the Cross Model. Trina didn't know how she felt about that, but she showed up every Friday anyway, grease on her hands, hope in her silence, and a legacy that had stopped being hers alone. The wind that morning carried a different weight. Not heavier, just older, wiser. It moved through Depot 16 like a whisper passed from one generation to the next. Trina opened the door at exactly 6:58 a.m., as always. The shop smelled of motor oil, coffee grinds, and old pine cleaners. Comfort in a bottle, familiarity in a breath. Tony was already inside, prepping the register. He looked up and grinned. "Sleep?" "A little," she said, stashing her bag. "Big day." He nodded. "You sure about this?" "I've been sure since the scar turned silver." Out front, folding chairs lined up under the rising sun. Local veterans, students, community leaders, and strangers with cameras stood in quiet groups, waiting. There was no red carpet, no podium, Just a square of concrete sidewalk in front of the store, and a black cloth covering a metal plaque bolted into the wall. Ray arrived with a binder tucked under his arm. He greeted Trina with a silent hug. "You ready?" he asked. She exhaled. "Let's do it." They gathered at 8 a.m. sharp. No music played, just birds, just breathe. Ray stepped forward first. "We're not here to honor a hero who asked for attention. We're here because the truth lives in plain sight now, because Depot 16, for all its dust and diesel, became a sanctuary, because Trina Cross reminded us that not all wounds bleed, some wrench, some weld, some teach." He stepped aside, motioned for Trina. She stood before the cloth, looked at it for a long moment, then pulled it away. The plaque gleamed in the morning light in honor of Trina Cross, mechanic, veteran, healer, witness. She fixed what others ignored. People applauded, but not wildly, softly, with reverence. Trina didn't speak. She just placed her hand flat against the metal, then stepped back. The crowd mingled afterward. Kids hugged her. Old men pressed coins and dog tags into her palm like offerings. Local media took photos from a respectful distance. Tony passed out free cups of coffee. Ray shook hands until his arm tired. Micah and Layla had sent a video message from overseas, projected on a tablet for guests to watch. Depot 16 taught us more than boot camp ever did. It taught us how to stay human in the mess. Thank you, Ms. Cross. That night, Trina sat on her back porch. She held the folded flag from the ceremony. She thought of her unit, of grease under fingernails, of helicopter rotors that wouldn't spin, of days that smelled like fear and metal. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt placed, like a bolt fitted just right, not flashy, but essential. Depot 16 stayed open late for a few nights. Visitors kept coming. Some brought broken things to fix. Some just needed a quiet place to sit. A man from Arizona dropped off a cracked guitar, said it hadn't made music in years. Trina tightened the strings and reset the neck. When he strummed it afterward, he cried. A girl brought her science fair project, a failed motor that wouldn't start. Trina rewired it with her, and when it buzzed to life, they high-fived. None of it made headlines, but it mattered. At the end of the week, Ray handed her a manila folder. "What's this?" "The last draft of the book. It's done. With your list, with your words. We titled it The Last Mechanic." She opened the folder. "Read the dedication for the ones who fixed more than machines, for those who survived what couldn't be spoken, for Trina, who carried all of them in silence until the silence became a voice." Trina closed it gently. On Sunday, the church down the road invited her to light the remembrance candle. She agreed. But instead of standing alone, she invited 5 others to light it with her, students from Fix It Fridays. Each of them struck a match, and for the first time the candle flame danced taller than the shadows. On the Monday after the candle ceremony, Trina arrived early at Depot 16. The sky was still streaked with violet from the night, the kind of dawn that didn't rush. She moved with calm purpose, unlocking the back room. It wasn't just a storage space anymore. Tony and some of the Fix-It students had helped her convert it into a modest workshop with tool racks, a salvaged engine block, and a long wooden bench that bore the wear of real work. She ran her fingers across the grain of the wood. There were no cameras today, no crowds, just one kid named Javier, waiting at the back door with a busted cassette player and a notebook full of drawings. "Thought you might be open early," he said. "I'm always open to people who show up ready," Trina replied. They worked in near silence, except for the click of screws, the occasional laugh when something sparked or buzzed, and the slow unfolding of trust between teacher and student. By noon, the player crackled to life. The tape inside was old funk, James Brown rasping out something about soul and grit. Javier grinned. "That's what I'm talking about." Later that week, the book launched. Ray hosted the event at the community center down the road. The walls were strung with photos of 42 to 9A, blown-up stills from the battlefield, handwritten letters from families of the fallen, and a timeline of the battle that nearly erased them all. But in the center of it all was a large, blown-up image of Trina, holding a wrench and smiling faintly. The title above her head read, "The Last Mechanic, a story of grit, ghosts and grace." Trina stood at the back during most of the event. She didn't like crowds or the spotlight, but when Ray took the mic and invited her up, she came forward. "I didn't write this book for me," she said. "I wrote it for the ones who didn't come back, and for the ones who came back in pieces and had to learn how to live again. Sometimes quietly, sometimes in places like gas stations and repair shops, sometimes by fixing other people's broken things just to remember we're not broken beyond repair." Thunderous applause, some cheers, a few tears. A month later, Depot 16 was featured on a national news program. They didn't show the gas pumps. They showed a wall full of thank you letters, a fix-it table with grease stains and tools, a young veteran hugging Trina whispering, "I thought no one understood." They showed her tattoo once, just a glimpse, as she lifted a box of spark plugs. Viewers called in, donations poured in. Someone sent 10 tool kits. Another offered to fund a scholarship. Trina declined most of the money, but she accepted the toolkits. Years passed. Some kids moved on to college, mechanics school, or the military. Some returned to volunteer. Some never left. Trina aged like oakwood, quiet, strong, with deeper eyes and slower steps. She still fixed things, still wore black boots, still had that faint silver scar along her arm. But now there was a bench outside Depot 16 with her name engraved into it. People sat there just to feel what it meant to endure. On the 10th anniversary of the attack that had once marked the end of Unit 42-9A, a ceremony was held at the National Military Memorial in D.C. Ray spoke first, then 2 other survivors, then a woman who had lost her brother. Last they called Trina. She didn't walk fast, but she walked steadily. She stood before the podium in her best denim jacket and boots and read the names slowly, clearly, one by one, then paused and said, "Not everyone who serves wears medals. Some of us wore grease and grit. Some of us still do." There was silence, and then a standing ovation. That night she returned home to find a package on her porch. Inside, an old dog tag, a folded note. "Miss Cross, I never knew your name until now, but I know I owe my life to what you fixed that night. Thank you. SPC Haldeman, Z9. Trina sat quietly for a long time, holding the tag, then placed it in the same tin box with the others. Somewhere in Georgia, in a town people rarely found on purpose, there stood a gas station that never closed early. Inside, a scarred mechanic taught kids how to fix more than motors. Outside, a metal plaque shone in the sun, and beneath it people paused, not to remember the tragedy, but to remember what healing looked like when it came in steel-toed boots, in calloused hands, and in the quiet insistence that dignity never needed permission to exist. Thank you for spending time with Trina's story, of battlefields and back rooms, of scars that stayed hidden until someone brave enough showed the world they mattered. At Here, we believe dignity doesn't retire. It rebuilds, it resists, it rises, sometimes in silence, sometimes in sparks, but always with strength. As you've seen, Trina didn't ask to become a symbol. She didn't want recognition or fame. She just kept going, waking up, fixing what was broken, helping others find worth in themselves when the world refused to see it. Her scars weren't a weakness, they were a blueprint for healing. In the quiet corners of America, people like her are everywhere. Veterans are running local fix-it shops. Survivors who return to schools not to teach formulas, but to teach how to stand back up. People who carry the weight of memory not with bitterness, but with grace. We hope Trina's journey reminded you of someone in your life, a mentor, a neighbor, a parent, or maybe even yourself. Maybe you've walked through fire and silence and now you carry tools instead of trophies. If that's why we see you, let us know in the comments what part of Trina's journey stayed with you most. Was it her silence, her strength, her refusal to strike back with anything but truth? And don't forget to take a moment. Think of the people who never got their names in books or verfasst in a plaque, but still made you who you are. Tag them, share this with them, tell them they matter. If this story moved you, consider subscribing. Hit that bell icon so you won't miss the next chapter, Silliansons, because at here, we don't chase headlines, we chase honor. One story at a time. We're not done yet. More stories are coming, of strength, of sorrow, of the quiet kind of courage that doesn't demand applause but earns it anyway. We're our channel, where real stories weld real respect. See you in the next one, and until then, fix what you can. Heal who you can. And remember, some of the strongest people are the ones rebuilding quietly right next door.